Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good wherever you at. Thank you for joining me. I definitely greatly appreciate it. I want to say again, of course, thanks to all the ancestors known and unknown, all those that were before me, allowing me to do what I do. Greatly appreciate it. And thank you all again for joining me, because time and attention, like I always say, is something that you can't get back. So thank you. We're going to take our time with this video. This was something that I wanted to make. I felt it was necessary. So we're going to cover a few things and we're going to take this one slow. So the name of this video is Monique-Netflix-Amy Schumer, The Ghost of Mom's Mabley, and Sagitarrius and the Energy of Humility. Now I know that's a lot, but I'm going to do my best to tie it all in and see how it all relates. So I hope you enjoy and I hope you get something from it. And I appreciate all the feedback that I got from the previous videos and the dialogue about Black Panther from the previous one. So much appreciated. Please hit subscribe, hit the bell, comments, feedback, no limits, whatever you want to say. So with that, I want to start off by saying, before I begin, I want to say that I'm not going to turn this into a political thing, but to set the context of this video, to kind of set the tone for it, it seems like we got really two presidents, right? One is Donald Trump, who's the actual president, commander in chief of America. But then it seems like in society we have Hillary Clinton as president, because the reason why I say two presidents, because the people's champ seems to be Hillary, or Obama, or anything that does not represent Donald Trump. Um, that's why a lot of subjects that you talk about, you might get opposition on, because the people in society, the social justice warriors and all that, now we're living in a climate to where you have to believe these things, and if you're saying something that's not, then you're a degenerate or you're some kind of insensitive human being. So I wanted to lay that down before I got into this topic, because I think that's important when we start dealing with what I'm about to talk about. So with that, we all know Monique, the comedian. For those of you that don't know Monique, you have to find it out on your own. I think it's worthwhile. But for those that know, she's recently asked for everyone to boycott, resist, don't support Netflix, because she went and met with Netflix, and she went to negotiate a contract for a stand-up. Oh, also this video, the main meat of this video is, are female comedians born, or females born to be comedians, or are they born to be funny? And I think with this Monique situation, we have to look at that, because in my opinion, Monique is accurate in her assessment of the bigger picture. However, I think that she needs to shift her stance and her position just a little bit more. I say that because I don't realize if Monique understands that she's fighting more than what she's presenting. Monique is fighting because she feels in Hollywood, and Netflix in particular, has showed racial and gender discrimination by only offering her $500,000 when Dave Chappelle and Chris Rock got 8 figures and Amy Schumer got 8 figures. So on the surface, especially as a black person, I can see where she's going with that. However, I think that there's other things that she needs to look at in order for her to better present her case. I think that Monique is certain issues that are just common in this country and in general that she's not shedding light on, and because of that she's getting backlash, where if she was to shed light on these issues, she will have an easier, or should I say smoother, time in presenting herself, and she'll lessen the backlash that she's getting. Now why do I say that? First, I was one of these people that was like, okay, Monique's bugging. She's saying that she's the most decorated and all of this stuff, and I was one of those slaves and coons that automatically was like, oh snap, she's bugging out. She doesn't, what is she talking about? But then I said, let me check the coon factor and the natural inclination that black people have to tear their own down. I said, all right, let me not be like that. So I went to the other side. I actually watched like 20 different interviews by Monique. And I said, let me look at what it is that's actually going on. And in doing so, and I always like comedy and comedians and the whole stand-up thing, let me look into this issue objectively. I found a lot. So what I found was that, and everything I'm saying might touch a nerve, but it's something that needs to be looked at. In general, and this is based off science, studies, history, maybe, just maybe, women are not meant to be comedians, or how we look at humor, things being funny, and things of that nature in this society, and just based on how men and women are naturally, comedy is not something that's native to women. Now, when I say that, it's not about sexism, because of course, if you listen to my videos or you know me personally, I'm not like the rest of these people on YouTube that just like to give opinions for attention. I like to back my opinions up with sound, substantiated evidence. Most people feel opinions are just what I feel. Forget all that. If I'm going to jump out the window or give my opinion and feel strongly about something, I think I owe it to myself and in general to back it up by things that are sound and that you can actually look at as thought-provoking, not just from my emotions. With that said, there were studies done that show that men and women look at humor differently. Men, in sexual selection and choosing a partner, studies have shown that men look in their women or their potential partners, or when they date, the quality that they look at in terms of humor is for their potential prospect to be receptive to their humor, their jokes. Women actually look to men to make them laugh. And the study said that men that are funny are more attractive, but men don't necessarily look for humor or comedy or being funny as a trait for women. They don't care about that. So I said, oh wow, that's something to look at. So when I seen that and I started reading more and I started seeing more articles and more studies and things done on the nature of comedy in relation to men and women, it made me think about something. It made me realize that maybe Monique is not addressing something that's a bigger picture than race and gender. Maybe on a fundamental, natural, organic level, women in different societies, especially this society, are not looked at to be comedians. And for that reason, the role of females in comedy is low. Now, in saying that, I had to back it up a little bit more. So I started looking at all different comedians of different generations and things of that nature. And why is it objectively that men get paid more than women in regards to stand-up comedy? Now, in the Monique situation, I started looking at that from the female of the black comedian. I said, well, she's boycotting, but I can't even name 10 black female comedians. Still can't do it. Relevant. Not of all time. So-called relevant. Still doing stand-up, still doing comedy. So when I thought about that and I started talking to people about that, I said, wow, so maybe this isn't about gender or necessarily gender or race. Maybe either black females are not working as hard as other males, regardless of race, in terms of stand-up comedy. Or maybe it's an institutional thing where black women in comedy, the Hollywood system has a fear of, or they block them. So as I started looking more, I said, well, let me take it outside of black females and study women in comedy in general. And the picture widened, and that's when I came across these surveys. It has been a known thing that women in the comedy circuit, or in general, in terms of female comedians, are not looked at as a whole as being funny overall. When I say that, comedy is not something that was attributed to women, period. The studies show that. Everything shows to that. So when I seen that, I said, wow, Monique is not addressing something. So that's when I realized that Monique, instead of addressing the gender and race thing, she needs to address the overall American structure and society that women are not viewed as funny. That's one. And then second, when it comes to stand-up comedy, maybe, just maybe, women don't perform stand-up and go on tour as much as men. So when I looked to look that up, that has been true. On average, women do not tour as much as men. And touring is what contributes to stand-up comedians getting the money that they get. So I said, wow. So I said either women are not working as hard as men, or there's something that's natural in men and women, as not only that they're not funny enough, or that naturally as a society we don't look to women to be funny, but they're not touring enough. And if you look, the top comedians actually tour more than the ones that are not considered the top comedians. And women in general don't tour. They don't do stand-ups as much as men, which also contributes to why they don't get paid as much. But before I get into that, I want to get into the history, because if you look overall, it's been a common thing that most women are not viewed as funny. And in society, we do not want our women to tell crude jokes, sexual jokes, or be out there. And this view holds. And because of that, that is a contributing factor as to why you don't have as much female comedians, and also why female comedians don't get paid as much. Now, if you look at the so-called pioneers of 21st century comedies for women, it would be Tina Fey, Amy Poehler, and a few others. And if you notice, they're very successful, funny, but they don't tour and they don't do stand-up shows. They got their money basically mostly from TV and film. So women in comedy get their money mostly from TV and film, not stand-up comedians. So Monique is not addressing this. So I think Monique needs to be more of an educator as to the overall society view and the basic differences in men and women before she even begins to tackle gender equality and racial equality. Now, Jerry Lewis, a lot of comedians look up to him, very legend. He made a statement, I think when he was receiving his Hollywood Walk of Fame, and said that he doesn't view women, I'm paraphrasing, he doesn't view women as funny or that they should be comedians or stand-up comedians. Basically, he said they should be making babies. That is what they're meant to do, is make babies, not tell jokes. And this is Jerry Lewis saying that. So this is something that's been going on in Hollywood for quite some time. There's another gentleman called Chris Hitchinson, I believe is his name. And there was a Vanity Fair article in which the women of comedy at that time, Tina Fey, the Saturday Night Live crew, things of that nature, Sarah Silverman, they wanted to rebut and challenge this gentleman, Chris Hutchinson, who actually said women by nature are just not meant to be funny, and that men are funnier, and that in society, men have more pressure to be funny than women. They disagreed. But he also said something that I thought was noteworthy. He said that women that pursue comedy, especially stand-up, and that even may be funny, they tend to be dykes, lesbians, or butch, or have male tendencies. And I said, wow. And then I seen a study that said that naturally women are not viewed as funny. Men are. And that women prefer men that are funny, and men don't care about whether or not a woman is funny. So when I looked at all of this, I said, wow. So I looked at all of the comedians and the ones that are successful, even the cross generations, and I realized that, like, you got Wanda Sykes, you got Roseanne Barr, you got Sarah Silverman, you got these comics that are hilarious and funny, right, to America, but they take on male tendencies, and they're either dykes or lesbians. And I said, oh man, so that gives more credence to the fact that when it comes to humor, funny, stand-up comedians, this just may be naturally a male arena, not just because of industry, but because of nature and genetics. Which brings me to Moms Mosley. Um, Mobley is the first woman stand-up comic that you can consider premier success. Black woman. And Monique actually mentions her a lot in her boycott. So when you look at Moms Mabley, you'll see that she, according to what I've seen, has been a lesbian. But she also had a lot of success. The first one to have real big success as a female, not just a black female, but a female stand-up comedian. She was making 10,000 a week at the Apollo. Um, she was on, I think, the Ed Sullivan Show or whatever. She was a regular. So she actually pioneered stand-up comedy world for women. But it turns out that she actually, if you look, she actually, in some senses, dressed like a man. And in her private life, they say that she was a lesbian, and that they call her Mr. Moms, Mabley, Mr. Mom, and that she was a lesbian. So when you see people like Chris Hutchinson and they mention the fact that these comedians that do attain success, although some of them try to be sexy, overall, they're actually Jews, dykes, lesbians. So when you look at Moms Mabley, and I'm saying this with all due respect, you'll notice that that metric fits. And when you look at other comedians like a Sarah Silverman, they have aggressive types tendencies. So it makes me wonder, is Monique's issue off the bat about race and gender, or is it just a fundamental natural order that when it comes to humor and how we view it in society, that is a masculine thing, period. And I think if Monique takes this position and addresses the natural order of comedy in regards to men and women, I think taking that stance, she'll shed light on something to make people think. And then from there, she could springboard into race and gender. Now, not only that, I also said, okay, let me look at the race issue. If you look at the top 10 comedians that had box office tours, grossed the most, the comedians that had stand-up comedy tours, the ones that grossed the most, 9 out of the top 10 are black men. And that was something that was found from 1982 now. So, from that, black males dominate comedy in regards to stand-up, based on numbers, based on what they've grossed. 9 out of 10, and ironically, the 10th one is a woman, which is Bette Midler. Now, if you look at the top 25 of the highest grossing comedy tours, you'll notice that out of the 25 that's on the list, 7 of those, I believe, are comedy tours by women. And out of those 7, 3 of those are by Margaret Cho. So, if Monique really wanted to attack this, she would ask herself, well, what if Margaret Cho, who's an Asian woman with 3 comedy tours in the top 25, she was to go to Netflix, how much would she be offered? If she would be offered more than Monique because Margaret Cho is not relevant and not as decorated as Monique, then she could cry racism. But before we even get to that, with that said, the fact that 9 out of the 10 highest grossing comedy tours are by black men, objectively that eliminates the racism, which means that in comedy, if people find you funny, they're going to pay, and companies are going to pay. You can see that with Kevin Hart. And the fact that 9 out of 10 of the top tours are black. So maybe it's not about racism. Monique needs to address the fact that maybe women aren't just as funny as men. Now, I'm not saying this. I'm saying it, but I'm presenting something because this is something that's been shown through studies, and this is something that has been shown through history. And not only that, the fact that women scientifically prefer men that are funny versus men that are not funny, there's more pressure on men to be funny just to appeal to women. And the fact that men do not find humor or do not require women to be funny in order to deal with them, also shows that comedy is not something that's high on the priority list for men. If that's the case, it's not about gender, it's gender bias, it's not about racism. It's about the sheer fundamental nature that men and women in this society and others naturally are different in regards to comedy. Men, in some regards, in order to sexually survive and to mate, have to be funny. There's more pressure on them to be funny because the reward is greater. Maybe also because of that, and because women prefer funny men, that contributes to men having a bigger audience and being a bigger draw for comedy than women. These are things that Monique needs to address if she wants to get people on her side. If she doesn't address this, she's going to continue to have the backlash she is at the degree that she is, and she might not win this battle. She needs to become an educator, period. And if she's trying to appeal to black people, you cannot get black people to unite unless they are abused, period. Unless you abuse them or show them that there's a common enemy that's abusing them, you're not going to get black people support. You can hang it up. It's not going to happen. Black people have to be abused in order to unite. You disagree, get mad, that's history. Anyone that disagrees, back it up, because I could prove it. So, with saying that, Monique definitely needs to be an educator. She needs to educate people on the fact that, in general, this society, because of how men and women are and what they prefer, sets its own limitations on women in the comedy field. Now, we also have to look at the fact that women just don't tour as much. So if women don't do comedy tours, how does Monique or any woman expect to get income equality if they don't put in the work that the men do to get paid? If Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle and Kevin Hart are touring ridiculously and women are not touring as much, we have to look at that. Is it a matter of women not having the risk-taking ability or the courage or whatever the reason to go out on tour? Or is it something that promoters and people that have these venues that host these comedians are stopping them from doing? Or is it both? Before we can even get to gender or race, I think Monique needs to look at that, period. Because to not do so, she's wasting her time. And she's not going to get her point across effectively. And she's not going to win this battle that she's up against. Now, to back that up, there has never been a woman on the top list of the top money-making comedians. The top money-making comedians in the world, women were never on that list until Amy Schumer made that list in 2016. So the list that comes out, I believe, is Forbes of the top paid comedians. A woman has never made that list, ever. Forget ranking. They never made it until Amy Schumer broke that in 2016. So if Monique is quoting Amy Schumer, she's also making a mistake because Amy Schumer has done something that no woman comedian, regardless of how great you view them, has ever done. And she has become number 4. She has made a list of the world's top comedians. So it's no way Monique is going to get that much money if Amy Schumer made that list. So the question becomes, why did it take all of this time for a woman to actually make that list? See, if Monique took time to think about that, she would start presenting other issues to the world first, build that platform and that foundation, and then attack gender, and then attack race. But it's no way that any female comedian is going to get as much as Amy Schumer if she's the first woman comedian in history to make the list of the world's top comedians. That's something that garners the payday that she got, even if she's corny. So Monique's premise is wrong. Now she mentioned, and I'm going to get back to Mom's Mabley, but she mentioned Ida B. Wells. Ida B. Wells, I'm not going to go into too much of who she is, but Ida B. Wells was basically this crusader for race equality, gender equality during the time when lynching was at its all-time high. Okay? She was a journalist. She used the newspaper and the media, the print, in order to shed light on the lynchings and racism in America. Okay? Now, she also was a champion of women's rights, not just black women's rights, but women's rights. But through women's rights, shed light on the marginalization that black women were getting in that climate during that time. So, Monique mentioned Moms Mabley and Ida B. Wells. So their spirit is looming over her based on what she said in her crusade for this kind of equilibrium. So since she mentioned it, I thought it was important to mention Moms Mabley and Ida B. Wells. The difference between Monique and Ida B. Wells, since Monique mentioned her, is that Ida B. Wells actually also aligns herself with white women to actually shed light on equality of the races and equalities of the gender. Monique didn't do that. If Monique thought this through, she wouldn't have mentioned Amy Schumer in terms of what she got. She would have aligned herself with Amy Schumer, who was speaking out against gender bias. But because Amy Schumer is the top person, female, and setting these records, she would have been best aligning herself with her, and they both could have shed light on these issues that are just fundamental to being a man and being a woman. Maybe Monique didn't know, but the fact that we view how women and men should deal with comedy differently, and that men and women prefer different things in relation to humor and comedy, if Monique took that approach and then she aligned herself with a woman like Amy Schumer, she would have had way less backlash and she would have got way more support because she would have been an educator and she would have shined light on something that's fundamental to being a man or woman living in America. And this isn't just an American thing, because if you look at comedians in the UK, comedians in South America, not South America, South Korea, you'll notice that the same thing happens. Talk show hosts, comedy shows in South Korea and the UK and these different things are overwhelmingly hosted by men. So we need to evaluate how we think women should act in regards to comedy. Because the more you study, you'll see that in society, men just don't respond well to women being vulgar and joking about it. They don't. Period. And that is why some women have took the opposite approach, and the most successful, we'll just deal with stand-up comedians, are the raunchiest. Sarah Silverman, Chelsea Handler, Moms Mabley, and a few others. You notice that they're blatant about sex, but it says something about society and how we view women. Is do in America, do men, do people want women to be vulgar and talk about these things? Those are more fundamental to look at than just hop into race and gender. Period. Now, why do I say that again? Because men are naturally pressured to be funny, right? Like, you can have no money, you can have nothing going for you, ugly or whatever, but if you can make a woman laugh, that charms them, that goes over well with them. So men, just as a society, have much incentive to be humorous and funny, but men don't really care about women in terms of being funny. The studies show that men just care about women receiving the man as being funny. So men just want women to be open to their jokes and laugh. That's what's important to them. Women prefer men to produce humor. So if that is a fundamental thing that's natural as men and women and as a society that we prefer, women just off the start are doomed in the comedy world, because that's just nature. That's just how we have it set up in society. So I don't think that Monique is going to get to where she's going until she addresses that. And then the question becomes, is this something that women are meant to be, comedians? Just like women playing football or basketball. They can play basketball amongst themselves, but what happens when you integrate the league? So these are just some things. It's not me being sexist. This is stuff that has studies and all that, but something that needs to be looked at. It's very important. Are women meant to be comedians? Are women meant to be funny and make a profit from it in this society? Is that something that society is ready for? When you think about it like that, this isn't about sexism, racism. This is just a fundamental thing, because it's not racism, because the top comedians, number wise, are black. Kevin Hart just overtook Jerry Seinfeld. 9 out of the 10 in the top comedy tours are black men, so that eliminates race. All of the females on there are white women, except for Margaret Cho. So it's not a woman thing, really, and it's not really a race thing, because Margaret Cho is Asian, and she's in the same age group as Monique. So we have to address the fundamental things as to why this is going on. And in terms of Ida B. Wells actually aligns herself with white women, even though some of them turned on her, and she crusaded against race. But that's different than comedy, because justice is something that's across the board. But when it comes to something that we prefer as a society, like humor and comedy, that's something that's on the underlying, it's underlying, it's not seen, and Monique needs to address that, and that's very important. Also, I think what's crucial is that this also shows, and this is getting into a little bit of the astrology, is because this shows the importance of humility. Monique is a Sagittarius, and the Sagittarius Gemini polarity deals with humility, tolerance, and being humble. Monique putting this into the forefront is showing, should you take the humility approach, or should you take the all-out crusade approach? Monique took the all-out crusade approach. However, she's also being humble and showing humility by not responding like Sagittarians normally do, and actually completely exposing. So this is a good thing to look at in terms of understanding how Sagittarians operate. The evolved Sagittarius deals with humility. The one that has not rose above their base physical nature, Sagittarian energy is meant to point, prove, teach lessons, and be self-righteous. So if Monique can continue to be humble and show humility in this exercise, but look deeper into the situation, because Sagittarians represent depth. They represent going beyond the surface and getting deep into a subject in order to get the wisdom. On this, I think Monique is just being like a Gemini. She's only skimming the surface, race, gender. But if she taps into her real self and actually digs deeper into her craft to see that there's deeper issues in society going on as to why women aren't getting paid as much, I think not only will she win and get her point across, but she'll get that money that she asked for from Netflix, and Netflix might start breaking records with the amount of contracts that they give women in general. So that's very important. So I wanted to make this video to show that as a society, we just don't either want or naturally view women as comedians or funny. You might have some women that make you laugh, but those are your standouts. But as a whole, men don't care about humor in women. And Monique needs to address that. And if she doesn't, that's that. So if you look at Moms Mabley, and you look at, there's also a group of women called the what were they called? They were called the Red Hot Vinyl Women or something like that. And it was these Jewish women that they also had some issues, but they were pioneers in terms of women comics and stand-up, but they actually made records in vinyl, and they made it themselves, and they profited themselves. That's crucial. And I also want to touch on, maybe Monique also needs to look at, is there an age issue? Because I got friends from different nationalities, and what I noticed across the board is that older women are funny regardless of gender, regardless of ethnicity. So maybe Monique needs to actually look at age. Are women more likely to be successful as comedians if they're older? If you look at the most successful comedians, the ones that have a legacy, and not just because they grew old, but you'll notice that they were really funny when they were older. Lucille Ball, Phyllis Diller, Joan Rivers, right? Lily Tomlin. You look at all of these people, and they were actually, I believe, in their 40s and up. Even the Red Hot Vinyl Sisters, or the Red Hot Vinyl Mamas. Yeah, the Red Hot Vinyl Mamas. You look, they were in their 40s and 50s, if not older, when they were making these albums. So, are women less likely to succeed in the comedy world if they're young or younger? So, let's go over the obstacles that I don't think, that I know Monique is not addressing, that I think needs to be addressed. And if they're not addressed, you'll never get your point across. Women in the comedy world do not tour as much as men. They don't. The only one that really toured a lot was Amy Schumer, and she split her tours with Aziz Ansari. Period. So women don't tour as much as men. Naturally, or societal preference, men do not care if a woman is funny. They care about other attributes in getting with a woman. Women prefer men that make them laugh or that are funny and produce humor versus men that don't. So men have an incentive to work to be more funny, and they're more likely to draw bigger crowds because they attract women and men, because women prefer comedy. These things, if they're not brought to the forefront, I don't care who comes out with it, women will never be on par with men when it comes to comedy. It's not sexism. These are things that are documented. Now, that's something that needs to be looked at, and if they're not looked at, forget about it. It's just a waste. Now, there was something else that I wanted to bring up. Pardon me, that's my speaker. I just thought about it, but it's gonna come to me. But like I said, that's very important, and I wanted to go over this because it also shows how there's so many things that seem unfair or unjust, but really some things are just based on natural societal. That's just how society is, and there's just basic differences between men and women. And if you try to neglect that under this fairness and equality and this one world utopian thing, it's not going to work. There has to be established light on the differences between men and women. This way, we always have a clear picture. Always trying to merge it into one and things of that. It's just not going to work. It's never going to work. So that's something that, and that's why I opened up with Donald Trump and Hillary, because you have one faction where you say whatever you want, that's America, and you have another faction that's saying, well, you can't say this, you can't believe this, because if you do, you're marginalizing this one generation or this one group of people or these types. Therefore, it's taboo to say it. So these things clash and form a opposing current that forms a friction in this society. And that's what's happening when you hear people like Monique go out there and try to push this thing, which I support her, but her approach needs to be shifted. Before she gets to gender and race, she needs to address these basic fundamental factors. And when she addresses these fundamental factors, she'll definitely get her point across. So I had something else I want to say, but I don't remember. So I'm going to wrap it up. So I hope that you all enjoyed this. Please give me your feedback. And I hope this was thought-provoking and hopes to get people to see that you got to start looking at the underlying causes of things and just society, how it is. Because if you don't do that, then you're going to always be misled to thinking that one issue is this way when it's really something else. So with that, thank you for joining me. Thank you for giving me your attention and your time. I greatly appreciate it. Please leave your feedback, subscribe, hit the bell. Peace.